Arising from this, let me mention a few of the policy challenges that I think policymakers face, both in our own context and beyond our own context as well. The first is in relation to the impact of uneven globalization and the geo-economic transition, which I have referred to west to east and east to south. Globalization has clearly produced significant benefits on the one hand, but as we're learning from this crisis, has also created a huge shift in power and influence into the hands of finance capital and high earners at the expense of middle-income earners, the unemployed and the young in many parts of the world. And those that are benefiting from these trends have acquired significant power and influence in policy making and in decision making. The second is we're also learning about the importance of extractive institutions versus inclusive institutions. And here again, institutions like Brookings and people like yourselves need to help us to begin to understand what does it mean to build inclusive institutions, particularly in a context like South Africa and Africa, where I believe we still have an opportunity to reshape the model of growth, begin to pick up on some of the lessons that we've learned about what inclusive growth means, and hopefully overcome narrow interests so that the wider majority of Africans can actually benefit from these processes as well. The second phenomenon and challenge that we have is what one calls crisis mutation. What started as a subprime crisis in the United States quickly evolved into ratings agencies and their role in AAA rating derivatives of one sort or another arising from subprime loans. That then mutated into a sovereign debt crisis, which was then connected to a banking crisis. And today we hear talk of some $2 to $4 trillion being required in order to capitalize European banks in order for them to become more stable than they currently are. And this crisis mutation now reaches the point where an island has a huge financial sector way beyond its GDP, and its investment practices and other financial controls being weak begins to send ripples of uncertainty throughout the world. So what we have, ladies and gentlemen, in this mutation of the crisis is what I would call a serial non-resolution of the crisis, where kicking the can down the road, inverted commas, I think that's an Americanism, has become a permanent phenomenon, where you change one major cliff into several mini cliffs and hope that the mini cliffs will be easier to manage than the big cliff, where you make the promise of creating new types of European institutions and hope that the promise of that alone would reassure different role players that Europe is on top of its game. And instead what we have is a continuation of crisis, a continuation of uncertainty. And in countries like South Africa, and indeed many parts of the African continent as well, which have a colonial link with the European environment, either in terms of export of commodities or export of manufactured goods, the non-resolution of the crisis in that environment then begins to have a negative impact on our growth prospects as well. Part of the challenge around the crisis is also the heated discourse, which I heard even earlier this morning in another place, between advocates of immediate fiscal consolidation and austerity on the one hand, and the advocates of fiscal stimulus and a more activist approach to managing this crisis and stimulating growth and job creation. And the result of this debate and the non-resolution of the debate is that we now begin to enter a downward spiral in respect of growth and certainty, particularly in the advanced economies, but also with a significant impact now on the big emerging market economies as well.